Let's start that over again. The sound didn't come through. Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com on Monday, which is our custom, and we are here from 2 o'clock to 3. And we hope you'll tune us in also on Saturdays at 12 o'clock in the afternoon when we are airing the program on the great radio station WFOV 92.1. And we hope you'll stay tuned for the next hour in both cases. And we're going to try to bring something that nobody else is, in fact, bringing. And we're going to come in and hand the scholars today. We're going to start the program off by talking about something that these scholars don't understand. And they keep on making these ridiculous and outlandish comments about impeachment. And some of these people, some of these so-called scholars have been teaching this information about the Constitution for 30 and 40 years, and they still don't have it right. And so we're going to try to come behind them and say a few things to level the playing field so that those of us who are the non-scholars, that is, we're not working at Harvard University, we're not so endowed to be at the top kindergarten, used to be the top university in the United States. It's now one of the top, at the most, high schools in the United States. They've been talking for a while now because of the continued attempt to remove Donald Trump from office, and they are trying that by any means necessary because they do not like the results that came out at the polls on November the 8th, I think it was, in 2016. And they're still fighting over the fact that the American people, 63 million of you, and I was including that number as well, went off the reservation and did not vote according to what they told us to do at the polls. We went out and voted an outsider in because we were sick and tired, sick and tired of being sick and tired, but sick and tired of the insiders. And so we went further to the outside and brought an outsider in and made him president. And after having the country being mismanaged by the political class, the two mafia groups, the Democratic Party mafia and the Republican Party mafia, and they had done nothing but further injure the country over a period of time. And the American people had an alternative this past election to go on the outside and bring someone in that had actually accomplished something outside of being able to use whatever oratorical skills they have and then become elected by attracting people, by promising to give more of taxpayers' money to the people who vote for them. And Donald Trump came in with the idea of making America great again. I don't know of any Americans, by the way, who do not want to see the country become great again. It's certainly not great at this moment. And to make it exceptional again, and it's not exceptional at this moment, Donald Trump came in with MAGA, Make America Great Again, and we bought into the fact that we thought this man was serious, and I still think he's serious about making this country a hallmark of what a country should stand for and represent on the international stage, and also in terms of the national boundaries of the country, because if you don't have a boundary, you don't even have a country. And I think this president is very serious about trying to accomplish a task that he was elected to carry out. And of course, the opposition, which is in both of the parties, both of these mob groups, the Republican Party no less so than the Democratic Party, both these groups would like to see this president fail. And you see that in all kinds of ways in which it's expressing itself, not only by the fact that the president was asking for something that would enough money to complete the wall that would protect this country's sovereignty and its political integrity, the boundary lines being a part of that, and how they gave him $1.375 billion of a $5.7 billion request. And they did it to embarrass this president and make it very hard for him to sign this deal. They wanted to close the government down again so that all of the fallout would come down and rain down on his head and his administration. And Donald Trump bought it and then declared a national emergency because he's continuing to try to outrun his opposition that do not support him and will not support him because they do not support this idea of making this country great again. They're in fact in opposition to it. But they have to be careful because the American people have endorsed the idea. And so you see them doing things through stealth and operating covertly. And you see them go through all of the different things here in terms of having gone through an attempt to overturn the election on November the 8th, 2016, when they were horrified by the fact that Donald Trump not only got 270 electoral votes, the minimum number that you have to have in order to become president, but actually accumulated 306 electoral votes. In other words, the other candidate's election was crushed in this campaign. And so they went out and tried to find some excuse to overturn it. And the first thing they did was to say that it had been one in which the votes were in the critical states of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. Those votes were, in fact, miscounted. They tried to do a recalculation. And actually, Donald Trump, in terms of the recount, gained some votes. So that didn't work. Then the idea was to head him off at the pass at the Electoral College, claiming that the three persons that wrote in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton, that wrote 51 of the Federalist Papers, James Madison, who wrote 29 of them, and John Jay, who wrote 5, the 85 Federalist Papers, they claimed that those Federalist Papers gave credence to the idea that if someone was elected by the popular vote, then the idea was overturn it by the electoral vote as a way of checking on the popular vote. Yeah, we're supposed to have government of the people, by the people, for the people. And the claim was made that the Electoral College is set up to stop and intervene in the will of the American people as another way of trying to stop this president from being installed in office. And that didn't work either. And you're now seeing other ways in which they're trying to do it. One of the things I want to talk about at the very beginning of the program is what I've been promising for the last couple of weeks now, to take on this noise that's being made by people like Alan Dershowitz and another professor at Harvard University. Of course, Dershowitz is now professor emeritus at Harvard University, but one of the professors still there, Cass Sunstein, who wrote a book on impeachment 20 years ago, and you would think then he would be the expert on the impeachment process, but he's making the same mistakes that Alan Dershowitz made, and that is that they do not understand what they're reading in the Constitution. Let me start out by quoting in the Constitution. Let me put up a quote of Article 2, Section 4. And you can see on the screen here where the second article, that is, say, the article that sets up and establishes the executive branch of government, it says in Article 2, Section 4, and Alan, I hope you don't mind me using your first name, I'm going to quote it. See if you can do this. It says, the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. That's the language in Article 2, Section 4. So then it says all civil officers of the United States. Let me bring in a little bit of history here to kind of make clear what that provision talks about, because there are two important parts in that language. One of them is who can be impeached, and the persons that the basis upon removing persons from office based upon the impeachment process. Now, Alan Dershowitz and some of the others think that in order to impeach, you have to have that particular criteria. But if you read that language carefully, you'll see that it's saying here that in order to use the impeachment process to remove the president or the vice president or other civil officers of the United States, you must then impeach and convict them on treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. And what Alan Dershowitz does not understand is that that is a requirement for removal. Read it for yourself. I'll put it on the screen so you can read it. The president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Does it say that in order to impeach, you have to then charge the person with treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors? No, it doesn't. It talks about what it requires to remove the president, the vice president, and all other civil officers of the United States. If you want to talk about what Alan Dershowitz was talking about in terms of the requirement for impeachment, that comes out of Article 1. We're not ready for this yet, but I'm going to put on the screen another part of this dynamic of Article 2, Section 4. But I want to go off the script for a minute and say something about where impeachment is found in the Constitution. In another article, in another part of Article 1, in Article 1, we just got through reading Article 2, part of Article 2, Section 4. But in order to find out what impeachment requires, as opposed to what removal from office requires, the requirement for impeachment is found in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5. In Article 1, Section 5, I should say. And what that says is, I'm talking about Article 1 here in terms of what's not on the screen. Article 1, Section 5 says the House, because Article 1, Section 2 sets up the House of Representatives. So in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5 says the House shall choose its Speaker. And by the way, the Speaker does not have to come from the House. It doesn't require that. But every member of every Speaker has always come from the House, but it's not required. What it says is that the House shall choose its Speaker. It does not say in the Constitution that the Speaker must be a member of the House. So it could be an outsider. And I hope we will finally get to that and bring some more outsiders in, because we had a home run with bringing Donald Trump in from the outside. We need more outsiders, those who have not made a career of being in politics and running the country down by their nonsense. We need more outsiders coming on the inside and running government from some status that they have done outside of government, having some achievement before they arrive in the governmental unit. And very few of them have any real achievements. Most of them are career politicians, but let's call them what they really are. They are career parasites. And that's almost all of the members of Congress. These are parasitic influences who are beating down on the country, and they want Donald Trump out because the bleeding that goes on to the benefit of the political elite is being stopped, or at least the attempt is to stop it, by this man that just came in from the outside after having built $1 billion business, including Trump Tower and other things this man has done, golf courses, hotels all over the world, and things that this man is accomplished. And none of the ones in there, not a single one, can touch the accomplishments of this president. And that's what they know. And his very presence indicts them because what they have not done, this presence is a testimony to that which can get done if they have the skill to do it.
It's like an academic. They said the difference between a businessman and an academic economist is basically a businessman will get things going, and then a academic economist is going to sit back and wonder if it would work in theory. Instead of seeing it actually working, they're going to say, "What did it work in theory, though?" So
they'll give you the theory about why they couldn't do it. But this man is a man of achievement, and they do not like the idea that he came in there and crashed the syndicate. This is a crime syndicate, and it has two different arms. One day I'm going to have some time to go into how we had the Democrat Party and the Republican Party and how that was established in the United States, because you're going to be surprised to find out is in the origination of it is really the left and right arms of the same group. In other words, the Democratic and Republican Party used to be one particular meshed, group, until they began to decide on the other side of a lot of things that happened prior to the division of this one unit into two units, which took place in the Democratic and Republican Party was set up in 1792, and then the division of that took place in 1828. When they decided to go with the Democratic Party and then the Whig Party on the other side of that, to split it, and then on the other side of it, you got the Democratic Party and then you got the Republican Party. It used to be Democratic Republican, and then after the Whig Party came in as a intervention group, on the other side that the Republican Party was created and the Whig Party went out of existence. So we now have the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And what I'm talking about here, I want to be very clear about it. We're talking about how the American people are being scammed. This is a scam that's going on. But in terms of the impeachment, I want you to look at the language again in Article 2, Section 4. The President, the Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed. It didn't say shall be impeached. It says shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Dershowitz wants to make it appear that that is the basis, treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Those are the basis for impeachment, and that's not true. That's the basis for the removal of a civil office holder of the United States from office. Now, there's some other language we need to understand as well, not only about what you can impeach for, but who can be impeached. It says here, and listen to this language very carefully, and all civil officers of the United States. That's very important, because in 1796, a senator was charged, and the first one, by the way, that was impeached under that language, inappropriately, by the way, was a senator who became the first senator from the state of Tennessee that was brought into the Union in 1796. And that was a person by the name of William Blount. William Blount is the only senator that has been impeached in the history of the United States. And it was a mistake to impeach William Blount under the Article 2, Section 4. Go back and look at it again. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Here's what happened in William Blount's case. The only senator who has ever been impeached under Article 2, Section 4, and it should not have happened if they had understood what had been written in the Constitution, because they misunderstood it also. Now, here's what happened to William Blount. William Blount was impeached, but when it got to the Senate, by the time it got to the Senate, he had been, because he had been impeached, he had been removed by the Senate, expelled by the Senate from the Senate. And therefore, when it came up for to try him on impeachment, which is required by Article 2, Section 4, because the trial takes place in the Senate. And that's found, by the way, in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6, where it says that the trial of the impeachment takes place in the Senate, and it takes a 2/3 vote in order to bring about conviction. But here's where they made a mistake in terms of impeaching William Blount, which was caught in the Senate, where the Senate said it did not have jurisdiction to, in fact, try the senator. Now, many people writing about this thought that the jurisdiction fell apart because at the time of the trial, Blount was no longer a member of the Senate of the United States, and that's not true either. The reason, listen carefully, and Dershowitz, you listen also, because you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm here to tell you that you don't know what you're talking about. I'm not at Harvard University. I'm better than that. If you think you are able to come behind what I say about the Constitution and what it requires, here's a number you can call, 810-250-7365. I dare anybody to call the number, all you scholars. You don't know anything. And your illiteracy is appalling. And I'm just really tired of listening to these people on television that are misinforming the American people. In 1796, there's a lot of history to it, but I want to get to the very meat of it. The impeachment of William Blount, by the time it got to the Senate for the trial, because you can impeach in the House by majority vote, but it's referred to the Senate, and it takes a 2/3 vote. But by the time it got over to the Senate, the members of the Senate had expelled William Blount from the Senate. So then the Senate decided that it did not have jurisdiction to try the case, because it says, "and all civil officers of the United States." Well, if you already put him out and expelled him from the Senate, that is not their idea is that he's not a civil officer at this point because he's no longer a part of the body. And so they got confused back in 1798, thinking that the reason why there was no jurisdiction, based on what the Senate decided, was because he was no longer a part of the Senate at the time of the trial. And that's not true either. The reason why, listen very carefully here, because this is a very technical point, and I'm the only one in the country that understands this. And if they did understand it, they would have said so. The reason why Blount was not found, why they said they had no jurisdiction to try the case after he had been impeached, was because it says here, Article 2, Section 4, the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. But a senator is not a civil officer of the United States, nor is a member of the House of Representatives a civil officer of the United States. They are civil officers, but they're not civil officers of the United States. They are civil officers of the state where they are elected from. They are elected representatives of the state. And if people understood this, they would understand how they shook the very foundation of this Constitution in 1913 by taking away the way the framers had put in place how to set up and elect the senators, elected by the states, by the legislators of the states.
It was the state legislators that had
they changed that, John,
in 1913, right?
In 1913.
The reason why I think they did it, so they could then look at the heels of, I don't know if that become before or after the passing of the allowance for the personal income tax upon the people of the United States.
John, you're very prescient about how they were shaking the foundation of this country. This country had set, the framers were very clear in how they had to structure this government to do the things that they intended government to do. Number one, to keep it under control, where it won't go out of control in terms of the power that is in fact arrayed to it based upon the enumeration of powers. That's in Article 1, Section 8, where you have an enumeration of powers in the Constitution in the 18 clauses of Article 1, Section 8, where the states, and that's who is dictating to the federal government as it creates the federal government. He creates and then it dictates to it those things that are the parameters around which he can in fact have his power. And beyond that, the idea was, since the powers are delegated, meaning the powers are enumerated. Enumerated means that they are systematized, itemized, enumerated, delegated to the federal government by the states that are dictating to the federal government, that these are the things that we are in fact relinquishing from our own sovereignty to create the federal government. But we are only doing it under the behest of these powers and none beyond the point in which these powers are being passed on these limited terms to the federal government. It's under that particular terminology and language that they found the federal government. That later on they'll try to act like the federal government created the states, which is total nonsense. Now, let's go back to this language again. I want to make sure that you understand this language here, because you see it on the screen here. You see where it says that civil officer of the United States. Therefore, William Blount being impeached. What do you say, John?
Yeah, I was just we missed the cue for the people coming about, leaving.
Oh, okay.
We missed it because I was getting caught up in it with myself.
Are they back now?
No, not yet. We got a couple of.
Okay, well, we were supposed. We're supposed to take a break at 26 minutes for the people at WFOV, and we definitely respect them as part of our audience and wanted to make sure we recognize them. They took a break at the 26-minute mark, and they'll be coming back at the 30-minute mark. And John, let me know when they come back so that I can welcome them back from the 4-minute hiatus. But what I'm saying here is that there's a reason why William Blount was inappropriately impeached. You cannot impeach a member of the House and a member of the Senate because although they are civil officers, they're not civil officers of the United States. They are civil officers of the states in which they are elected. You see, a civil officer of the United States is one in which the national landscape dictates their presence in a particular body. And that would only be the President of the United States and the appointees of the President of the United States confirmed by the Senate. The members of the House are not elected by the national body. They are elected by the states. By the way, by the districts in the states. So that if you're in fact in Michigan right now, we have 16 congressional districts. And therefore, the number of congressional districts you have in the state, those are the districts that elect your members of the House. That's a people's body. So they are not elected on a national level. Therefore, they're not civil officers of the United States. They're civil officers of the state where they are elected. They're civil officers, don't get me wrong about that. But they're not civil officers of the United States. And let me prove that by putting up on the screen another part of the Constitution, which is Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2. Now, you have on the screen all the sections of Article 1, Section 5, but I want to focus in on the second clause of that. And I'm going to read it to you. Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2. Listen to this very carefully. This is very important, Alan Dershowitz. And if you understood it, you would understand what I said first and how it ties into this right here. Listen to this very carefully. Each house, talking about the Congress now, each house, that means the House and the Senate, each house may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and with the concurrence of 2/3, expel a member. Now, why would it have this provision in here as a way of expelling members of the House and the Senate if they are included in Article 2, Section 4? The reason that that language is in there is because the framers are clear in their mind, although they don't explain it necessarily in the text, but they expect the people to have enough understanding of the way the system is set up.
Coming back now?
In a federal system. Okay, they're back now from the break they took at the 26th mile. I want to welcome you back from WFOV 92.1. I want to welcome you back. I'm still ranting here about these buffoons. If you see the reason why Article 2, Section 4 does not and cannot be directed at the members of the House and Senate for a number of reasons. But one reason above all the other is that if that were the case, then what's found in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, that I just got through reading, each House may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish the members for disorderly behavior, and this is part right here, and with the concurrence of 2/3 expel a member. Why would you have this process placed in the Constitution as a way of expelling a member? 2/3 vote for the House and 2/3 members in the Senate to expel their own members. The House expels this member and the Senate expels this member. Why would they be necessary if it's covered in Article 2, Section 4? Let Alan Dershowitz explain that with his dumb self.
You know, you're bringing a point. I'm serious, man. I mean, I've told people before, that's just a formality you have in that Constitution there, because you do have it memorized down pat. You know, I've never seen anybody bring up that, because we have a tendency to kind of blur those two together, I think. And those two things are different, they're at odds with each other.
John, these people have been teaching this stuff for 30 and 40 years, and they still don't understand it. They don't understand. Folks, let me tell you something. This country is being led by buffoons. And it's on all cylinders. How can you teach the Constitution in the premier institutions in the country? I'm not talking about Knoxville College, where I graduated from, a school of 1,000 students, or Parker High School, where I came out of Parker High School, and I had Mr. Vaughn as my government teacher. And there were a lot of things that he taught that I thought were really great, and so on and so forth. He sent me on that's where I learned my love for the Constitution. And I read, quite frankly, the 85 Furley's Papers when I was in high school, having finished 3.5 years in high school and having skipped over 5th grade in elementary schools, coming out at 17. I just fell in love with reading about the framers. I had read the Furley's Papers when I was in high school. And it's shocking to me to listen to these silly people emoting this nonsense. They don't recognize, for example, that the Constitution is written thematically, that it is interchangeably this part ties into another part. And if you study it thematically, you see how there's a theme in the Constitution. That is, say, there's a reason why Article 2, Section 4 says all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for conviction of treason, bribe, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. And then if you understand that it makes that statement in Article 2, Section 4, you're not confused then when you have in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, where it states that the members of each body of the Congress will, in fact, expel its own members. The House will expel its members, 2/3 vote in the House. Not referred to the Senate for that. That's in Article 2, Section 4 for the civil officers of the United States. In the members of the state, those who are elected on the state level, that is the members of the House and Senate, they have their own expulsion mechanics in place in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2. And that is, they are expelled from Congress by 2/3 vote in the House and 2/3 vote in the Senate. It's not referred to the House because you don't want one chamber dominating the other chamber. And if these silly so-called scholars, they're pseudo scholars. If these silly scholars had read, and if I'm not right in this in terms of quoting where it's found in the Federalist Papers, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take this book in front of you next week, and I'll eat the whole book. It ain't gonna happen, folks. If these silly professors of their own ignorance, had read Federalist Paper 64 and 65, they would know why the impeachment clause was written as it was written, because it's in Federalist Paper 64 and 65. And check behind me and make sure that's true. But that's where you're going to find it.
Well, you know, the thing is, you bring up these things here. These are like these are very more like detailed. You have to look at the details to get what you're saying on these. But look at the simple fact that people take. We always saying we believe in the ideas of democracy. This country is not a democracy.
Not a democracy, John.
And it's like you were saying. Okay, and there's a big difference between what we are, a representative republic.
That's Article 4, Section 4.
And see,
it's not even. Look, in Article 4, Section 4, it says that the state shall be. Each state shall be guaranteed a Republican form of government. And listen to how we say, I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic. Does it say to the democracy?
There's no democracy. There's no democracy mentioned in the that bill, the Constitution that you're holding.
John, you understand it. I wish we had more people understood. I wish we had Alan Dershowitz to understand it.
I got to admit, though, years ago, I was under the assumption this was democracy and representative the republic was interchangeable.
Anybody, look, John, if that were the case, let me tell you where you find that. If you go back to go back to Federalist Paper number 10. Oh, it's found there. You can believe that. In Federalist Paper number 10, you'll see where James Madison, and by the way, this is the first Federalist Paper that James Madison wrote. James Madison's he wrote 29 of the 85 Federalist Papers, but number 10 was the first one he wrote. And he was picking up on the idea that had been raised by Alexander Hamilton in Federalist Paper number 9, and that was, how do you deal with factions without becoming oppressive of factions? But we also know the fact that the majority faction have a tendency to oppress minorities. If you get a majority faction, and they got more on this side over here than on that side over there, that can become oppressive. And one of the best examples of that oppression would be that whole apocryphal story of the wolf and the lamb. Two wolves and a lamb are sitting at the table discussing what they're going to have for dinner. And the two wolves at the table decide what they're going to have dinner is, by majority vote, lamb chops. So the lamb is one person there, and the wolf is two. The wolves are two in number. So the majority faction says lamb chops, and therefore his voice is canceled out. That's a problem. And the framers, in their due diligence and in their infinite wisdom, no wonder Ayn Rand says in a book called The New Intellectuals, they are the first intellectuals and so far the last intellectuals. These people are not intellectuals we have in these universities right now. How can you be an intellectual and get such a fundamental part of the Constitution wrong and do it for 30 years? You know why they did it for 30 years? Because they're parrots.
That's exactly what it was. I was at college, and I went through, the political science class that they require for your degree, and they didn't mention that. They said they glossed over the fact about Republican and democracy. It was a friend of mine who started studying constitutional law, and he and I argued with it. And I had to admit it, he was right, because he said, and she sent me this link to a 1908 Army manual, U.S. Army manual used to give to people, and they said a republic's this, and a democracy is this. We're not a democracy because it will lead to mob rule. Very simply stated. This is the Army Manual, 1908. So right there, the average guy who got drafted or went into the military, who read through that, had a better understanding of it than these people who are going to get PhDs in political science and all this stuff from the major university of this country. And that's a sad commentary.
John, you're right. I am sick of these fools. They're on TV spreading more nonsense. If they stay in their classrooms, we'd be better off. But they got to come out of the classroom and tell the nation the noise, and they spread that noise from their classrooms in front of the entire country. And that's a big problem for these numbskulls to be teaching the entire country about this insanity. The Constitution does not allow for the president, the vice president, and other civil officers to be removed from office just because of impeachment. It specifies specifically the basis of it. The basis is not the impeachment, Alan Dershowitz. The basis for removing the president from office is not the impeachment, is for impeachment upon treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. But you can impeach for other means. But you cannot remove the president from other means because it spells out the basis for the removal. Let me read something to you here about the first president. We've had two presidents impeached. Andrew Johnson, the 17th president, who was impeached and tried in 1868, and Bill Clinton, more recently put on trial for impeachment. Now, they say that what Alan Dershowitz and others are saying is that you have to have a crime for impeachment. You know something? I'm sick of these fools. Can these people read? These people are illiterate. Didn't I just tell you in Article 2, Section 4, it says the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States, does not include the members of the House, does not include members of the Senate. They're taken care of in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2. That's taken care of there. It's not in Article 2, Section 4. Article 2, Section 4 is talking about those who are civil officers of the United States, not the ones who are elected by their states. The states are not abdicating their power over their elected officials. They're not giving that up to the federal government. We have a federal system here. Some powers on the federal level and some powers on the state level. And the states have not abdicated their oversight over their own members. Can you understand that, Alan Dershowitz? You people are insane. Now, this idea that you have to have a crime to bring about impeachment. Let me go back to the very first president. I said that William Blount was the first person impeached. Not the first, I didn't say that Johnson was the first person. I said he was the first president. The first person that was impeached was the senator from Tennessee elected in 1796, the same year in which Tennessee gained its statehood. You can check that out also. I'm right and they're wrong. And I just wish they would, I wish they would call this number, because I got that number. 810, dial 1 first, 2, if you're out of the vicinity, 810-250-7365. And it's just like when Donald Trump says, turn the cameras, let them see the crowd. He said they don't turn the cameras. I'll tell you another thing they're not going to do. They're not going to call that number either. They better not call it, or it's going to get embarrassing. It's going to be hot up in here. Not that I'm going to get mad, but I can tell you right now, that's a battle they can't win. Now, the other thing is that you have to have a crime to bring about impeachment. Mr. Dershowitz, in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, that's where it's found. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, where it says that the House shall choose its speaker. And I said earlier, it doesn't have to come from the House, although it always has, but they're not required to do that because it's not stated in the Constitution. They should choose their speaker and shall have the sole power of impeachment. But impeachment of whom? Civil officers of the United States. Not civil officers of the states. That's for the House that's for the House to bring forward on its members and the Senate to bring forward on its members. And the two are to do their business separately, because you don't want one body That's another part of the division of powers, by the way. You don't want one body over being an overlord of the other body. And I was getting ready to tell you about, well, okay, a lot of different things here. I get excited about it because everything has to be explained, because everything has been misexplained by these so-called experts. Alan, I can tell you right now, Alan Dershowitz does not understand the Constitution as it relates to this particular part right here. And I'll tell you another thing that they do to show their ignorance. When they start talking about the Constitution, they then start talking about court cases. Let me tell you something, folks. When I'm talking about the Constitution, I don't go into court cases, because the court has oftentimes rendered one verdict based upon the Constitution. Take, for example, the most famous case, which is the Plessy versus Ferguson case of 1896, and then how the court, reading the same language, nothing had been added to the Constitution in terms of the 14th Amendment, which had been placed in the Constitution in 1868. It had not been changed and amended further in 1954, yet the court said in 1896, in Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal was constitutional. And then in 1954, under the Warren Court, it came behind the court of 1896 and said that separate but equal is inherently unconstitutional. It changed its mind based on the same language. So when I start talking about the Constitution, I'm not talking about the men and now women, but the men at that time in black, which is the book written by Mark Levine. The guy has a book out, a very important book, called The Men in Black, meaning in black robes. Because you're not endowed with any wisdom from the mountaintop, from Mount Sinai, for example, because you put a black robe on and then all of a sudden you have all this wisdom. You have to study in order to have an understanding of this. And that's why you have these precedents that say one thing and they find out later on it didn't mean that at all. So I don't bring in what these miscreants say on the court. In fact, the court, which is where Alexander Hamilton wrote in, don't tell me, Federalist Paper 78. Go check that out. Go read Federalist Paper 78, where Alexander Hamilton was saying that the federal courts would be the least intrusive body, and it would in fact have the least amount of power of the three branches of federal government, because of number one is numbers, and also because of the specific responsibility assigned to it by Article 3. Boy, was that wrong. Not only wrong in terms of the fact that we have a judicial tyranny right now, because what we have now, these judges on the court that are in fact legislating from the bench, and that's not what they're supposed to do. That's what you have in Article 1, but they've taken on some of those responsibilities by legislating from the bench. And now we got the courts involved in assuming a second part of the government responsibilities and assuming that for themselves, and they got these people that's in power and these other branches acting like they have to bow down to the court when they are three co-equal branches of government. Boy, are we stupid in this country. Listen to these buffoons. Some of them calling themselves scholars, talking about, well, they are scholars, but intellectuals, there's no way. You can't compare these people with the framers. That's why Ayn Rand said in her book, The New Intellectuals, that they were the first intellectuals, meaning the framers, and so far they are the last intellectuals. We have not created any intellectuals since that time period. There's nobody that can touch the coattails of Alexander Hamilton. Not that I think that Alexander Hamilton was right in his discourse after he had set the wheels in motion of the landscape of the country. They were brilliant in that. But I'm not talking about that in terms of governing. They were just as bad as governors as anybody was. That's not the exceptionalism of the country by them governing. The exceptionalism is in what they founded as the documents. And we better stop tampering with it, or we're going to even lose that. Because people are trying to change the things they put in place. They've already changed it in very paradigmatic ways. that undercuts the very things that the Constitution is designed to do, which is restrain these people. You have to restrain government. If you don't restrain government, you'll get exactly what we have right now with these miscreants now running this country and running it into the ground.
You know, here's a suggestion for future shows. Maybe we should discuss the attempt to totally change and enlarge the Supreme Court under FDR and the horrors that could have caused. You know, so I mean, these
which
people
he should have been removed from office for that. That was, wow. In '37, when Roosevelt tried that, Roosevelt should have been removed from office based upon that, because that's the very foundation of the country. The separation of powers is really important to restrain government. Once you begin to consolidate the powers of one branch into interface with another branch, you have too much power, and the branches of government no longer co-equal with each other. Okay, we're going to have to get into that also in the future discussion about why it is that this idea that you can go and shop around, as Donald Trump thinks he can do. He said the other day that they'll go and they'll take it to the court, and we'll lose there, and then they'll take it, then we'll appeal it, and we'll lose there, and hopefully we get to the Supreme Court and we'll win at the Supreme Court level. Look, 63 million people voted for Donald Trump, and nobody voted for these federal judges. They are appointed to their positions by the president. Can you tell me how a person appointed by the president assumes more authority than the president? No such thing. If they are co-equal branches of government, then in order to overrule the president, you have to have a 2/3 vote verdict of the branches of government. That is, say 1/3 of the government saying something and another third of the government saying something that overwhelms the 1/3, which is a part of the federal government occupied by the president. But no 1/3 can dictate to the president. If they can, where is that located in the Constitution? Please, in fact, inform me of that. It's pure nonsense. And if I'm wrong, then Andrew Jackson was wrong. Because in the Chisholm versus Georgia case of 1832, when Georgia had a problem with the federal government, there's John Marshall coming in and telling them that the states could not act within their own borders in terms of something that they had done in the case of Chisholm versus Georgia, where Georgia took one position and John Marshall took another position. And that's when Jackson, for a lot of reasons, said, and some of it's apocryphal, but there's no reason to believe that he didn't say it because we see what the actions were. He told Marshall and said this to him: John Marshall has made his decision, now let John Marshall enforce it. Because John Marshall's job is not to enforce the law. John Marshall's job is that of an arbiter that's set up to deal with disputes when the different aspects of government come into conflict with each other. And let me tell you another thing while I'm on this point about that. I hear these crazy fools, and that's who they are, talking about, listen very carefully here, talking about a constitutional crisis. You have to be mad to be saying stuff like that. There's no such thing as a constitutional crisis. Folks, let me tell you something. The Constitution is the law of the land. There cannot be a constitutional crisis because it is the arbiter of everything underneath it. All three branches of government are underneath the Constitution. We are all under the rule of law based upon the Constitution. You don't have a constitutional crisis in this country. You have a institutional crisis in the country. And you break the impasse by appealing the impasse in the institutions to the Constitution. The crisis is not there. The crisis is where the institutions may well see it differently, and to break the impasse, we call upon the Constitution to see what it requires. And they call this a constitutional crisis. I'll tell you something. These people give me a headache with their nonsense. There's a constitutional crisis. How can that be? How can you have a crisis of the Constitution? There is no constitutional crisis. If the president does something and the courts say otherwise, you go to the Constitution to see if the president has a seat of authority that's given to the president in Article 2, Section 4. And let me tell you, miscreant, something in Washington right now. You cannot do something in the legislative branch that would prohibit the president from carrying out his constitutional responsibilities to, in fact, protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, and also protect and defend in Article 2 the boundaries and the borders of this country and secure the national defense of the country. Can't do it. And when I get into some other things that happened later on, maybe another discussion, I'm going to talk about some of the things that have been added to the Constitution that cannot be there, because the Constitution cannot repeal itself. You can't use the Constitution to countermand the Constitution. That can't go on either. Therefore, anything added to the Constitution that countermands the Constitution in terms of the foundation principles in it, that becomes unconstitutional, although added to the document.
Because our founder said, if need be, there could be a chance to reset the government, but it's going to be established on the same principles they already established.
John, it's amazing to me that the document, this is not like 2,000 pages. If they can't understand this right here, I can see why Nancy Pelosi said we have to pass the document in order to find out what's in it. Well, this has been ratified. This was ratified in 1788. It's been amended 17 times. Basically, Amendment 1 through 10, and then you have the so-called, first through 10 is so-called Bill of Rights, and then the other part would be the other amendments up to 27 has been added to the Constitution since that time. So the Constitution has really been amended 17 times. The first 10 amendment at one time in 1791. But let me finish this up, and we'll get to the rest of it next week. I want to just say this in closing about Johnson's impeachment. Angered, I'm reading from this document. Angered by Johnson's open defiance, the House of Representatives formally impeached him on February 24th by a vote of 126 to 47. They charged him with violation of the Tenure of Office Act, and I'll pick it up next week, and bringing into disgrace, quote unquote, into disgrace, ridicule, hatred, contempt, and reproach the Congress of the United States. Not treason, bribery, and other crimes and misdemeanors. And I'll pick it up there next week. Those are not crimes, by the way, Alan Dershowitz. And that's the first impeachment of the president, and those are not crimes in the Constitution. Those are not crimes. Disgracing the Congress is not a crime. Yet he was impeached for that. And the trial failed by one vote to convict. Okay, I got to pick it up next week because I'm not really finished with that yet. Okay, until next week, won't you stay tuned and then follow your dream between now and then, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.